This morning, we're going to be continuing our discussions. I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been talking through the Sermon on the Mount, talking through the first speech section of Christ. We've been discussing all the lessons that we get from him, from that sermon. And we went through the Beatitudes, and we talked about being the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And then we're going to jump into verse 20 of Matthew chapter 5 this morning. That's going to be our main focal point. And really, it's a key verse to the whole sermon, and even to the whole book of Matthew that Jesus is trying to talk about. And what we're going to look at is, now that Jesus has said what kind of people are approved of by God and what kind of people we need to be, he is now going to shift into actually teaching what true righteousness is. He's going to be focusing on this new thought, or not a new thought, so to speak, but he's going to be focusing on how to help us understand how to better be the righteous people that he has called us to be, if we're going to call ourselves his disciples. That's who he's talking to. That's who he's been talking to, is his disciples for the last few verses. If you're going to call yourself a disciple of Christ, then we need to hear what he has to say, and we need to listen to it with the intent to do something about what he says. And so that's what our focus is this morning. The verse we're looking at is this. It says, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." You know, if you've ever heard me talk about this verse before, you have to understand that this is a scary thing to say to people. Because you're talking, let's put it into our terms today. If your righteousness doesn't surpass the elders and the preacher, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. That's the mentality or the idea of what Jesus is telling them, why it's so impactful. Because these are their religious leaders. Now, we understand the scribes and Pharisees, they had an issue why this was brought up. They were doing things with an outward appearance and not focusing on things that were important in a spiritual way. They were missing some of the grand points that they were supposed to be doing, and Jesus is going to teach that. And what we're going to be doing this morning, and possibly the next lesson, is going through the contrast that Jesus talks about after this to teach this point. To teach why we need to be more righteous than them, or to show more righteousness than they did. Because as he talks about in Matthew, I believe chapter 23, where it talks about them cleaning the outside of the cup, but not cleaning the inside of the cup. What good is it to you to clean the outside if you don't ever fill the inside of the cup with what is good? If you don't ever clean it for what is good. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And what you're going to see is this whole Sermon on the Mount, as I've said, is basically all about righteousness from the very beginning to the end. In verse 5, in chapter 5, verse 6, when we're talking about the Beatitudes, he mentioned this phrase. He said, "Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness," you've got to starve for it. You've got to desire it. Again, in the same section in the Beatitudes, he says, "Those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness." It's the same way as saying for the sake of Christ. In chapter 6, where we haven't gotten to yet, he says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men." This is where he's talking about Pharisees and scribes again, people who are trying to do things of an outward appearance just because they want to look good to other people. That's not the point of being a Christian. I mean, people should be able to tell who you are based on the way you live. But we don't act like Christians just so other people can see it. We act like Christians because that's what we truly believe, and that's who we are. We follow Christ, regardless of who's paying attention. And then again, at the end of chapter 6, or towards the end of chapter 6, he says, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness." All through these books, you will see righteousness is what Jesus is trying to get them to understand. And it's about living your faith. So it's not just about being faithful, but it's actually living that faithfulness. That is what this righteousness is all about. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. So the first contrast that Jesus gets into is verses 21 through 26 of Matthew chapter 5, and that is the contrast of anger. Now, before we jump into the verses that we're going to look at, I want to talk a little bit about anger in the New Testament. Now, there's two specific types of anger that are taught about in the New Testament. The first of which is thumos. It's that idea of someone who simply gets heated over a situation. This is something that we probably, if not everybody, I would assume, has dealt with it at some point in time where something happens, somebody says something or does something that you consider kind of dumb and it makes you angry and you get your temper flared up. But then you realize, you know what, it is what it is. It happens. I mean, people make mistakes, whatever it is, and your temper goes away. But sometimes things get you. We have to admit we're human. It happens. So we have that type of anger. And then we have the anger that we're talking about here. And that is the word orge. It's almost like saying the word ogre if the R and the G were in a different position. So if that helps you remember it that way. This is that long-lived anger. This is the anger that when somebody does something and you get angry about it, it doesn't go away. You don't let it go away. You continue to fume over it. You continue to think about it and to continue to process it, wanting to have, to a degree, revenge. That's the mentality of the anger here. This is the kind of anger that Jesus is forbidding here. And the reason I talk about this is because we're going to be looking at it, and when we look at the verses, in the English language, in some ways it would seem like it's saying the same thing over and over again, yet it's saying there's higher degrees of punishment for each of those things. Some of those things in our language, they don't even make sense as to why we're getting punished for it, because it might be something we say all the time, or something similar to words that we've heard. But we have to understand that there's a little more behind the words that are being used here than just what we can see on the surface. So that's why we're talking about this. Now, what this anger is in the end is this is the anger that doesn't forgive and forget. This is the anger that does not allow things to be pushed aside or to dissipate. It is an anger that continues to build, an anger that you could say even to a point breeds hate. And so that's the anger that doesn't work with righteousness, not what true righteousness is. So this is the anger that we don't want to be dealing with. This is the anger that Jesus is trying to deal with here. If you look at the Greek, this is the word that's used. So let's look at the verses. In verses 21 and 22, it says, "You have heard that the ancients were told, 'You shall not commit murder.' But whoever commits murder shall be liable of the court. But I say to you," and follow that pattern, because this is the pattern you're going to see with Jesus' contrast. You've heard it said, but I say to you. It says, "But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever says to his brother, 'You good for nothing,' shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell." It's hard to understand why calling somebody a fool might be a problem. I mean, I'm sure there's times where I've called somebody a dummy or an idiot in my life and never necessarily meant it in a bad way. But that's what we're talking about. It's hard to sometimes see the meaning or the depth behind some of this without looking at what the original language is talking about, what that orge is trying to get at, this long-lived anger. And so what you're pulling out here is you see these three different levels of anger. You see the first one being that they are simply angry with their brother, but even with that anger, they're guilty of the court. You see that they say, "You good for nothing." They start calling them names. And then finally you see them go to the point where they say, "You fool." So let's talk about these increasing levels of anger. There's three that we see here and three that we need to talk about. The first being that you're angry with your brother and you're liable before the court. This is that idea of you fuming, you getting so angry that you're fuming about it, but you never actually do anything, but you're angry. Now remember what this anger is. This is anger that you do not let go. And so why we can say that this is an increasing level of anger is because you're holding on to this. And so if you don't let this anger go, if you don't show the kind of righteousness that Jesus is trying to teach here, then this righteousness becomes number two. And that is that idea of saying, "You good for nothing." This is the idea of speaking to another person with arrogant contempt for who they are. So now that anger has not only become anger, but now you're starting to dislike or to even hate your brother or your sister or somebody else in the world. And the reason why we're talking about the amount of sin that starts coming in with this anger, why this is so bad, is because now think about it this way. You're showing arrogant contempt, you're showing hatred to a degree, anger towards somebody who is made in the image of who? You're showing anger and contempt for someone who is made in the image of God. That is not something any of us have the right to do. It doesn't matter who you are talking about. It doesn't matter how horrible of a person they might be in this world. They are made in the image of God. And we don't have the right to show that kind of contempt or hate towards them. And now for the third one, and why I said this is increasing, is now keep adding these on top of each other. So now you were angry, but you didn't end up doing anything about it. Now you're starting to talk to people in a bad way, or to not to just simply be angry, but to dislike or even hate them, showing contempt for who they are, to the point where you get to using this word where it says you fool, the word moros. This is where we get our word moron, which might make sense, might be easy to understand. But the meaning behind it in the Greek is you're saying, calling someone one without reason, or one who is morally worthless. Again, where do we have the right to consider someone morally worthless? Now, we understand that people, again, might be bad people, and maybe they don't follow God in their lives. But God wants all to be saved, and he has all people that are made in his image. So we don't have the right to do that. Now, there is more to this word, though. This idea of moros, it carries with it a very bad connotation to it. It's the idea of calling someone an apostate or a scoundrel. And the idea behind it is that you are calling him this name with malicious intent. So again, you never actually did anything to them other than calling them names or calling them morally worthless. But the reason this is increasing levels of anger, the reason why this last one, you're to the point where Jesus himself says you're in danger of hell itself with this kind of attitude, is because he's saying that you are looking at these people and you are implying malicious intent upon them. You hate them so much that now your anger has grown to the point where you hope something bad happens to these people, even if you don't do it yourself. You wish nothing but ill will towards them. And so this is the contrast that he's trying to teach these people, his followers. The Pharisees had this mentality about them is, as long as you don't kill anybody, you can be as angry as you want to be. Jesus said, that's not right. That is not the way that you are supposed to believe. That is not the teaching that you are left with. That is not what we are trying to do for you. And John does a good job of bringing this lesson back in, maybe in a way that hopefully everybody will understand from the time he wrote it to the end of time. As he brought back in 1 John chapter 4, verse 20, he says, if someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. How can we say we truly love God if we cannot truly love those who are around us? I mean, even if they're bad to us, even if they are bad people in general, if we hate them when God loves them and God wants them to be saved, how can we say we truly love God or follow God, follow his son who died for that person that you hate? We can't be that way. That's why Jesus is using this as a contrast to say we need to be better. We can't be like these scribes and Pharisees who are completely missing the mark. They're so focused on the rituals, on the outward things that they're supposed to do, that they forgot about the spirit of the law. That is what he's trying to teach here. These Pharisees were so focused on keeping everything as much as they were supposed to, and the law simply said, do not murder. Well, as long as they don't murder, they can do whatever else they want. Jesus said, no, that's not enough. You need to understand the spirit of the law here. And so that's what he's trying to teach them with that first contrast. The second part of this passage, starting in verse 23, it says, therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go and first be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you are one with him on the way, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid up the last cent. The main things to pull out of this second half of that same passage that are talking about that same idea of anger is the lesson that he's trying to teach you. You need to be reconciled. You need to correct this behavior. You need to be reconciled to your brother. You need to make friends quickly with those who you are against, who you would consider your opponent, because you're not supposed to think about them that way. You're not supposed to think in that evil or in that harmful way through anger. And so basically what he's trying to teach here is that we need to control our anger. We need to make sure that we aren't letting our anger run rampant. That's not what it means to be someone who follows Christ. Just because we don't end up killing them doesn't mean that we can hate them as much as we want. That is not the teaching that he has given. That is not the teaching for us to follow. The second contrast that he gives is adultery. In the next few verses, in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 30, he brings up this second contrast that we'll go through. The passage says, "You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of your parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. For it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to go into hell." So a few of the things you see here, one of the things you see from the Pharisees, the idea of what they teach is that you can look, but don't touch. You know, I couldn't help but thinking about I don't know how many of you dealt with it. I'm sure I dealt with it, or I might have been the one who did it at one point in my life as a child. You remember when children would sit in the back seat of a car and you say, "Hey, stop touching each other"? And then you have the one kid that would be right here as close as they can be to touching, you know, right here. I'm not touching them. I promise I'm not touching them. And they just cause the issue after issue after issue. That's what I think about, is the idea that these Pharisees are saying we can get away with as close as we can. We can push the boundary as far as we can, as long as we don't actually commit or break the law, then it's all okay. But Jesus is coming in and saying, no, this is not right. He says that if you're looking at a woman with this lustful desire, you're already having an issue. You're already having a sin problem in your heart. Now, one of the things I want to focus on right here is the word looks. This is a Greek word that is showing a continuous looking. I mean, this is not just you happen to be walking down a road and you happen to see somebody, because who cannot see people walking down the road? There's all kinds of you that I can see right now. But the whole point is that you look with an intent to look, or you look continuously, like you are staring, you are gazing, you are to the point where you are fantasizing, even potentially mentally engaging in whatever it might be that you are thinking about. That's what he's talking about. Say, it's impossible not to see people unless you're blind. We're going to see people. That's not what he's trying to say is sinful. He's saying that if you're someone who goes as far as you are desiring someone to the point that you are actively lusting after them, desiring them in your heart, that you are fantasizing about them, and this is somebody that you have no right to. So we're not necessarily talking about husband and wives here. We're talking about a man or a woman who is lusting after one who they have no right to. Someone who doesn't, in some ways you could say, belong to them. You aren't one with them already. That's what we're getting at here. So it involves all this. Now we will also deal with, just because it talks about it in this passage, I don't want to just skip over it. There's a lot of people who take this extremely literally, and so we need to discuss it for just a minute. The two things that it brings up here in this verse as well, and it might be somewhat ironic, you might say, because he brings up the idea of looking or lusting after people, that the right eye is one of the things he mentions in this contrast. But what he's talking about here is the right eye and the right hand. Now, understand, in a cultural time, and even today to some degree, the right eye and the right hand would have been considered very precious body parts. Very important to what you needed to be able to do in your life. I mean, even today, even though we don't necessarily do what as far as I understand, was done in the past, where people would try to force their kids to be right-handed. But right-handedness is still predominant in the majority of people. And so having your right hand, if you lose that right hand, it can cause a lot of struggles for you in life, or you might be incapable of doing a lot of what you need to do to live, to get by. The same idea is what he's giving with the right eye, and using that partially to connect to the idea of what you're looking at. But what he's getting at is that these things are not as valuable as your eternal soul. And in the end, what he's trying to teach here is not this literal self-abasement, or not this literal chopping off or casting away of any part of your body. That would turn the church into a hospital. That would turn the people who follow God into people that are always in need of help. And it still, in the end, wouldn't keep anyone from sinning in their heart, if you really think about it. I mean, if you want to cast away all the parts of your body, and you could still sin if you so desire to in your heart. So that's not what his point is here, is not to take this literally, but he's trying to make this emphasis on how earnest we need to be about pursuing righteousness in our lives. We need to pursue it in a way that it is more important than allowing ourselves to be caught up in this sin that is evil, that is wrong. We need to make sure that we aren't doing these kind of things. We also can say the reason why we know this isn't literal is because later in Colossians chapter 2, I believe verse 23, we see that it says the will of God is against self-abasement or things like that. That is not what he wants for us. That is not the teaching that he gives. That is wrong in his eyes. So we know to not take that literally. The third contrast that we're going to talk about, the third one in this order, is divorce. In verses 31 and 32, he goes into it. And before we get into it, one of the things to understand is, you could say it's somewhat similar to the world we live in today. In Jewish circles, divorce was just kind of a normal thing. The idea was you can divorce for whatever you want to. Say if she burns your toast, so to speak, you can divorce her. If she looks at you wrong, you can divorce her, whatever you want to do. That was what they were allowing. And the way that they made it okay is they simply said, just give her a certificate of divorce. In the Hebrew, that was called a get. And it was supposed to protect them from committing adultery. The problem you have, and the reason why Jesus brings this up, is because these people are taking this authority upon themselves to say that they have the right to say a sin isn't a sin. They're saying that we can stop you from sinning just because we want to be able to do what we can do. We'll just write you a certificate for it. Think of it maybe like a doctor's prescription. If you were living sin in your life and you go to a doctor and he says, I'm going to prescribe you or write you this letter and we're going to say that it's no longer sin because I wrote it, what authority does that doctor have? Or any individual? So he doesn't have authority to call what is sin and what is not. Only God does. And so Jesus tries to come in and teach them a little bit better about what he's talking about. And so you see that their idea is that sin as much as you need to, as long as you give her a divorce. It says, it was said, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except for the reason of unchastity or immorality, whichever way your version reads, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. All right, so Jesus says, don't do this. He says, if you want to be truly righteous, if you want to live in the way that the spirit of the law teaches, if you want to live in the way that you're supposed to, the way God created you from the very beginning, you're not going to divorce your wife for any given reason. Say, there is one exception that I will give you, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he says, the idea is that he's saying, think about what this does to your wife. Think about the fact that it puts her into survival mode, especially back then. I mean, think about how women made a living, what they had to do, what they were forced to do to get by, because it was the men who had to work and provide. And so if you would divorce your wife for any reason, they were not given a whole lot of options. They either had to get remarried, which would mean they would be forced to commit adultery, because they would be remarrying when they weren't supposed to by God's law. There was no bond broken there according to God, because there was nothing that met that one exception. Or the other option is to go into a life of things that women shouldn't be doing. That was how they could survive. And so he's talking about, think about what you're doing to your wife. You're forcing her into this survival mode that she doesn't have a whole lot of choices of what to do. And so a lot of times it would force her to be living a life of sin if people would do this. Now that exception that's given, right here it says, except for the reason of unchastity or immorality. The Greek word there is porneia. Might sound familiar to a word we know in English. It's that idea of fornication. It kind of has that umbrella term of that type of thing. Whatever it might be, we usually take it as someone who cheats on you is the idea of unchastity. Someone who's unfaithful is a way that it might be said. So that is the one exception that Jesus gives. He says the only reason that this is the exception that you give, because now think about the certificate. They would give them a certificate to protect them from committing adultery. The one reason why Jesus says it's okay to divorce your wife, or if you want to vice versa, it's okay for you to divorce your husband for the reason of unchastity or any of that, is because they've already committed the sin of adultery. If they've already committed that sin, then if that bond is broken, if you divorce them, they're already in that sin. You're not making them commit that sin. It's not on you. Say they've done the one thing that you are supposed to keep them from doing. And so the idea would be that it wasn't acceptable for a man or for a woman to put away a husband or a wife for any reason except for this. And it parallels well here with what he teaches again in Matthew chapter 19, verse 9. Immorality was the only one exception that was allowed to be given. And so what you see in this case is the man who is, you could say, foolishly or unscripturally divorcing his wife gets the ball rolling on all kinds of other sin. And so if you're going to divorce your wife for any reason except for the one that is given, then Jesus is telling you here that, okay, now you're going to force your wife to commit sin, because she's going to be forced to either go live in sin, or she's going to be forced to go remarry. And again, remember the period of time we're talking about. I know today you ladies aren't necessarily reliant on being married to someone, and you have the right to work in whatever field you want to work in, and that is a wonderful blessing of the age that we live in. But remember the teaching we're talking about here and who we're talking to. But it still would apply to men today or to women today. If you're gonna get divorced for an unscriptural reason, then you get the ball rolling on all kinds of other sin, not just your own sin. You get the ball rolling on adultery of the wife who remarries, because you're forcing that wife to remarry, or your husband. But you also get the ball rolling on the sin of the one who they marry into. Say, now that person is also committing adultery, because that person is not supposed to be married to your spouse. They're still supposed to be connected to you. The idea here, and let alone the sins you bring upon yourself for that as well, whatever you do, the adultery that you commit when you go out and remarry, or if you do or don't. There's all kinds of sin that gets started because of this. And what Jesus is trying to get at, what he's trying to teach, is that if you are genuinely righteous in your mentality, in your mind, in your heart, in following God, you would never even consider doing such a thing. You wouldn't do this to your wife. You wouldn't do this to your husband, because you're not going to put them in that position. You're not going to force sin in their life. You're not going to force them to live single or to live alone for the rest of their lives. You're going to take care of them in the same way that you vowed to from the very beginning. That is what he's getting at with this contrast. That is what the Pharisees were missing. They were saying that, look, you can divorce all you want, and if you just give them this certificate, it protects them from the sin. There's no certificate that you can get or give that protects from sin. If you are committing the act that God calls sin, it is sin. We can't change that. We don't have the right to, and neither did the Pharisees and scribes even back then. And so we have to understand that Jesus is trying to teach us exactly what this is. So just as by way of reminder, here's the first set of contrasts that we went through. What we saw was the scribes and Pharisees. They say, don't commit murder. In the first contrast, where Jesus says, don't even be angry. Because if you're angry in your heart, and remember, it's the kind of anger that fumes, it's the kind of anger that builds up, that gets to the point where it's hatred or malicious intent upon somebody, you wish evil upon them, then you're completely missing the point of that whole do not commit murder. Just because you don't actually commit the murder doesn't make it right if you want that person dead. That is what he's talking about here. And then the second one is the do not commit adultery, and he says don't even commit lust. Say if you're looking with the intent to desire or to have something or fantasize about that person, to do something in that sense, then you are already basically committing that adultery. You're already committing that sin that you shouldn't be doing. Your heart is messed up, is what he's trying to get at. You are not living in the righteous way that you should. Your heart and your mind are focused on the wrong things. And then the third one is the if you give a certificate of divorce, you can divorce all you want. And then Jesus says divorce only for unchastity, only for immorality, only for unfaithfulness is the idea. Only if they actually already commit the one sin. Otherwise, you're causing them to commit sin, and you are committing sin in your own life. And if you're going to be a truly righteous person, you don't want sin in your life, and you don't want to force sin onto others either. And so you're going to focus your life on him, and you're going to set your heart in that way. In the end, what Jesus is trying to emphasize with all of this is that we need to go beyond just the mechanical order of things that the Pharisees and scribes were able to do. We can't deny the fact that the scribes and Pharisees were obedient to the rules. They followed the law as much as they could. But where they fell short was in their heart and in the spirit of the law. They didn't live out the law because they would go and they would do their offerings, they would do their prayers, but there was no heart in it. It was not about doing it for God. It was not about doing it for anybody but themselves and for just simply saying, I was able to keep the law. That was what they were doing, and that was where the problem was. Jesus doesn't want us to be that way. Even today, let's say we have some of those similar rituals that we are asked to do, such as partaking of the Lord's Supper, singing, worshiping God on the first day of the week, whatever it might be. If we look at that and we say, well, that's all I've got to do is show up one time on Sunday a week and make sure that I live by those rituals. And I can say I checked the box, I took the Lord's Supper, I showed up on the first day of the week, I gave my contribution, whatever part of that you want to say. If that's all you care about and if that's all you're doing, then it's not much different than what these Pharisees and scribes are doing. Their heart wasn't really in it. They weren't actually seeking and hungering and thirsting for righteousness, to live their lives in the way that God asked them to. And so that's why he's trying to teach these contrasts. He says, don't be like these people. Follow me. And guess what happened at the end of this Sermon on the Mountain in chapter 7, verse 28 and 29, I believe it is. He says they understood him to be speaking as one with authority. How powerful is the teaching of the one with authority coming from Christ? He says this is the way we need to live our lives. He wants us to make sure that we are cleaning the inside of our cup, not just the outside, as the Pharisees would. I want to leave with one last scripture. This is in Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 4. Hopefully it'll give an idea of the kind of attitude or the mentality that we need to carry about us, the kind of people we need to be if we're truly trying to live out our righteousness. It says, brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them, speaking of men like these Pharisees and scribes, is for their salvation. For I testify about them that they have zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness to everyone who believes. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 19, the little bit of the Sermon on the Mount that we skipped over, it talks about Jesus coming to abolish the law or he says, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. That idea of fulfill, the Greek word there is the idea of complete. He's coming to complete it, and now he has completed the old law. He didn't come to do away with it, what God taught. He came to fulfill that prophecy. He is the goal of all of that prophecy. He is the reason we have a chance at salvation today. And we need to be, as Paul says, just in the same way of his heart's desire. Even if there are people like these Pharisees and scribes in our world today, people who maybe missed the mark, we need to have a desire for them to have salvation in God, to find God. Don't be angry with people. Don't look at them in a bad way. Don't hate on people, anything like that. We need to care about them. We need to hope that they will find God in the same way that we have. And we need to make sure that the way we have found God is not the same way that they did, where we know enough about Scriptures to be arrogant about it, to be ignorant about it, to try to create our own righteousness. We need to seek after the righteousness of God and His Son, not after what we can do, but after what they do for us. We need to make sure that we do that each and every day of our lives. And we need to make sure that we seek the righteousness that Jesus is trying to teach here. And there's more to be said, and we will continue to say it. But I hope that these contrasts give you an idea of the kind of righteousness that Christ is wanting us to live out in our lives. I know not all of these things maybe are the same today as they were back then, because the world was different. That's true. But there are similarities between a lot of what the Pharisees and scribes did and what the people back then had to deal with and what we do today. Some of those things are very, very similar. But the only thing that remains the same always is that we are to follow Christ. We are to seek after His righteousness. Doesn't matter what in the world changes. Christ is the same today, tomorrow, forever. Let's follow Him. Our choice this morning is, what righteousness are you going to seek? Are you going to be like those who seek their own? Or are you going to seek after the righteousness of Christ? That is the decision that each of us have to make. How are you going to live your life? Are you going to live it for you, or are you going to live it for God? If you're ready to make that decision this morning, if you haven't, then I hope you will come, and you will help us to help you in any way that we can to find God, to seek after His righteousness, to follow Him in your life. Or maybe you made that decision and maybe forgot that you made it, or didn't make that commitment well enough, and you want to recommit yourself to God, to recommit yourself to living in the righteousness by the spirit of the law, not just the letter that Jesus is talking about here. And I hope that you will allow us to help you in that as well. If there's anything we can do for you, I hope that you will come as together we stand and sing.